Good morning, friends, and welcome to another time of Wandering Toward Wonder. This is a time each week that we set aside to cultivate wonder and joy and anticipation of God's presence in our lives. My name is Will Ed Green, and I serve as an associate pastor and the director of discipleship at Foundry United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C. I am so incredibly grateful that you've taken a few minutes to be with me today. Thank you. As I see folks joining in, I'm so glad that you're here with me. Now, if you've been joining me, you'll know that each week we ask where we're joining in from today. I am myself tuning in from my home in Brightwood Park in Washington, D.C. Good morning, Michael. It's good to see you. Calling in, as always, from Florida. I hope you're down there enjoying some of the beautiful weather. I understand you've sent some of that our way today, so thank you for that. And I want to invite all of you, as you're tuning in, to let us know where you're wandering in from this morning as we create some sacred space together. Where's home for you as we wander together and create a community? Now, if you've been joining me the last few weeks, you'll know that we were scheduled today to welcome Dr. Denise Hopkins of Wesley Theological Seminary, who shared an absolutely amazing lecture with us on Sunday as part of our Lenten Lectures of Lament. Hey, Jem, it's good to see you today. Dr. Hopkins was unable to be with us at the last minute, and she shares her regrets. We're going to look forward to having her with us soon to share more about the Psalms and Psalms of Lament. But in the meantime, I guess that just means that you and I are going to have to do some wandering of our own today. So I hope you're ready for a little bit of a journey with me. I'm certainly ready to share that journey with you. So I've been thinking a lot lately about Blanchard Springs Caverns in Arkansas. As a child, there was this rite of passage in my family where all of the young ones, at some point in their lives, were loaded up into the car in Hope, Arkansas, and driven the nearly 4 hours up to the northwest corner of the state to the caves at Blanchard Springs. And our family has all kinds of stories about these trips, including most famously a story about why drinking spring water running out of a cave is a pretty bad idea. One word for you there, guano. But Blanchard Springs has been a large part of our family's kind of story for a long time. And as a child, I can remember walking into those caves for the first time. I think I was about 9 years old, and just being awestruck, absolutely awestruck, at the awesome formations in the caves. In fact, I've got a picture or two here for you. Let me see if I can find those really quickly. So you'll see there's a shot of the caverns. Here's another shot of the caverns that you can see these amazing stalactites and stalagmites that were in these Blanchard Springs caverns. And I later learned, of course, as I became obsessed with this kind of cave life, that these were formed because the limestone that the caves are made out of which rivers of water and time had carved the caverns, was permeable. And it was filled with these kind of small and imperceptible fissures through which the water would leak. Perhaps you know this, if you know anything about caves. And as the water runs through these fissures, it leaches out minerals. And as the water drips slowly and imperceptibly over time, the minerals that it leaches out of the limestone build up. And these drips of water begin to create these impressive structures, hundreds of feet tall, many, many feet wide, these beautiful things called stalactites and stalagmites that adorn the cavern walls and floors. What's even more impressive about these, of course, is that each and every single one is unique, and it's often unique to the cavern system. So that the stalactites and stalagmites in Blanchard Springs are unique because of the minerals in the limestone in that particular area, because of the flow of the water and the particular water pressure in that space. And two things still stand out to me about Blanchard Springs, even though it's been 20 years since I was last there. The first is this memory of standing in the caverns and watching the beauty and majesty of these impressive structures being born, right? You literally get to watch the water run down and drip on the floor through the cracks in the limestone. And it felt almost like being in the womb of the earth and watching creation still being born around you, all the while knowing that what you were witnessing in that moment would take centuries and centuries, long after your life had ended, to reach its fruition. And the other thing that I continue to be just amazed by is the way that you're able to perceive what's beginning to take place as you watch this water drip, but you're never quite fully able to understand the fullness of what's happening. These stalactites and stalagmites, they grow over centuries and millennia. And while one might, if you're able to slow yourself enough and pay close enough attention, begin to perceive what might come from the dripping of this water over the centuries, the full measure of what that water can do was the kind of stuff that you're unlikely to see fully realized in that moment of watching. So I've been thinking about Blanchard Springs and about this idea of permeability, and particularly this week as I've kind of wandered around spiritually, about spiritual permeability. And what I mean there is the way that our souls, our beings are created to let life and light and love and the living presence of God enter them. We are created with fissures, with cracks in our being through which God and the beauty of the world around us enters, right? We're created to long for that, to look for that, and to let that enter into and shape our understanding of self and our understanding of the world. Of course, the flip side of that, that's often so uncomfortable for so many of us, is that those same fissures that let in life and light and love make us vulnerable. They make us permeable, and they let in not just the good stuff, but they let in other stuff too: anger and disenchantment and heartbreak and lament. I spend a lot of time, especially as we're in this season of Lent and we're talking so much about lament, wondering if we've not created a world which discourages the gifts of this spiritual permeability with which we're created. In large part because I wonder if we're afraid of what might begin to grow in us, what might begin to change in us, what might begin to be born in us, like those stalactites and stalagmites are born, if we begin to let our feels, the good ones and the bad ones, the beautiful ones and the broken ones, into our sense of self. So often we are enculturated, we're encouraged to cultivate this kind of tough outer layer in life, this rock hard facade that prevents things from getting to us, right? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. We're taught early on to play the game, to take the reins, to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. All messages, all ways of thinking that encourage us to ignore the stuff that might otherwise get into the inward parts of our being. We're taught that emotion, especially the strong and painful ones like lament, are an unwelcome distraction to our success in the world. I don't know, does that feel familiar or sound familiar to any of you out there? That lament is not something you should let in, right? We kind of treat ourselves like we've got this tough outer layer that prevents it, or we should, because if we let it get in, it's somehow going to derail our plans. Can you think of a time that you've been told that? Or who told you that, and perhaps why? I mean, I get it. Spiritual permeability is, it's the ultimate confession of our humanity. We are full, all of us, each and every one of us, full of cracks. And even our best self, even our most healthy self, feels anger and frustration. Even our strongest self has its weaknesses. Which is why I think this series on lament and this season of lament that we're exploring at Foundry is so important. Because it invites us to remember the gift, not the curse, the gift of our spiritual permeability, of our own humanity, and the way in which it's those small fissures, those cracks that perhaps even we aren't fully aware of, allow God to make of us exactly who we're created to be. Allow us to soak up the Spirit of God, which enters in the midst of all those other things, those strong feelings of positivity and negativity, and make of them something beautiful. I've long had a deep connection to the hard-headed, overachieving, and desperately needing approval witness of Peter, the disciple. Peter and I go way back, and he and I have we've got some stories, Peter and I, in our own spiritual wandering together. The Gospels, again and again, they recount that Peter, in his effort to prove his own ability and worth, regularly seems unable to acknowledge his own spiritual permeability. He seems to really favor these facades that make him feel safe, secure, strong, worthy. One of my very, very favorite stories about Peter occurs in that moment when he attempts to walk on water. Any of you know that story? If you know the story, you'll know that Peter seems to think he's got it all kind of figured out, right? Like he sees Jesus and the disciples out in the boat. He decides he's going to wander out. Lord, I want to walk on water. And so off Peter sets onto the water, and he's walking along. And then I like to think that perhaps because he was afraid to admit his need of Jesus, he was afraid perhaps to admit that he was actually afraid. His fear of the waves, which he was trying to prove wasn't that big of a deal, overcomes him, and he begins to sink, right? He takes his eyes off of Jesus and begins to sink beneath the waves. And Jesus then, of course, like Jesus always did with Peter, he reaches out. And Peter, who now having had to face the fact that perhaps he wasn't as thick-skinned or independently capable as he thought he was, cries out for help. In that moment, Peter was forced to confront the fact that he wasn't able to do it on his own. For all his game playing, for all his spiritual facade, for all of his pull himself up by his own bootstraps kind of thinking, Peter needed assistance. And that his fear, he knew, right, that his fear was not going to simply be overcome by bluster and bravado. Denying his humanity in that moment and his need for others and the very real power and experience of fear could have cost him his life. And yet still, Jesus, as he so often does, not just with Peter, but with others, entered into the fissures and cracks of Peter's faith and Peter's bravado and Peter's self-assuredness, and he rescues him. He breaks through and makes of a moment that could have been heartbreaking something beautiful, because Peter cried out, because Peter admitted his need. Sometimes I think in our desperate attempts to control ourselves or others, to play the political and personal and professional games of life that we think will get us ahead, sometimes in our work to hide our vulnerability or fear, to ignore our lament and heartbreak, we forget that the point of our relationship with God is not that we've got it all figured out, or that we're perfectly put together, or we're already perfectly loved and accepted. I mean, we are perfectly loved and accepted, but we ourselves aren't perfect, right? The point is acknowledging the liberating truth. And truly, this is liberation, that we're just not created to do the stuff of life on our own. I want to say that again, for those of you in the back who may be feeling the same thing I feel sometimes when I feel like I've got to do it on my own. We are not created to do the stuff of life on our own. We're not created or born having got it all figured out. We're not created to be the wisest or the most beloved in the room or the most perfect right out of the gate. We are created to be with one another and to need one another. We're created with microscopic spiritual fissures and cracks, which make us permeable, which allow spirit and love to enter. We're created for relationship, and specifically the kinds of relationship that allow the flow of life's emotion and beauty and pain to seep into our being. And knowing that when we do, we let that stuff kind of begin to enter into us, that God much like those stalactites and stalagmites, oftentimes in ways imperceptible to us in the moment, is making something majestic and beautiful and more profound, birthing a thing in the womb of our being that otherwise could not be born. And here's the thing. As Peter continued to acknowledge the fissures in the facade he built, over time, we see it in the gospel. The Spirit begins to leak in and leave in its wake in the caverns of his being a topography, a spiritual topography, completely altered and infinitely more beautiful than would have ever been possible otherwise. As corny as it sounds, Peter was left in those experiences with stalactites of humility and stalagmites of grace that allowed him to better be who God called and created him to be. One of the deep gifts of this pandemic time for me has been that I've had to sit with myself an awful lot. I've had to confront things in my own being and my own ministry and my own relationships that I had learned not to trust, because I am really good, if those of you who know me are out there, you'll know this, at talking myself out of my own intuition. I am having to and have had to confront the fears myself that I have tried so desperately for so long to hide. Some of the uncertainties and insecurities of call and ability and place and space and worth that for so long, as a queer man in ministry, I've been afraid that other people might exploit. I've come to learn in a new way, because of this pandemic, what my body does in grief, what my heart does in moments of self-doubt and fear, how my mind attempts to make me ignore or disinvite my own spiritual permeability. I've had to face the fissures and the facades of my being. And as I've done so, as scary and painful and countercultural and sometimes isolating as that work can feel, I found Spirit inviting me deep into the caverns of my own heart. Spirit calling me to plumb the unknown depths of my own created belovedness so that I can better perceive what it is that Spirit and God have been doing in the fissures that I admitted and the fissures that I didn't all along. I've come to think of this season as one of spiritual spelunking, emotional cave diving. And as I've embraced the challenge of that invitation, I've come to find that even when I've denied it, I've been spiritually permeable. And all that my denial was doing, all that those facades were doing, all that effort and striving and struggle to prove and be and make myself feel worthy was doing, was keeping me from seeing the beautiful things God has been able and is yet cultivating in me. When Spirit leaks into those fissures, mixed with the beauty and heartbreak of all the other things in the world around me. And as I've done so, as I've done this spiritual spelunking, as I continue to do so, and man, let me tell you what, these are some deep caves. Even as I'm watching it unfold, watching Spirit run slowly down the stalactites and stalagmites, spiritual constructs being born in me, I found and have found profound beauty in every single day, like the stalactites and stalagmites in Blanchard Springs. And it's a beauty that's always changing, and it's always growing, and it's always something different than it was the day before. So as we wander toward wonder this week, as we look for ways to cultivate our awareness of God's love in our lives, I want to invite you to forget your facade. Forget your facade. Learn to be okay, not simply to accept, but to celebrate all the fissures and fault lines through which the stuff of life enters in. Because, in a slightly modified version of what Leonard Cohen was saying, in that one song, there are cracks in everyone. And that's how the water, the life giving water, the soul quenching water, the heart transforming water of God's love gets in. And friends, let me tell you what, even if you can't see it, I know enough of you and have seen it in enough of you to know that what it leaves behind is something profoundly more beautiful than our minds alone could ever envision. And I want to invite you to receive again the invitation of keeping a holy Lent, of introspection and self reflection, the opportunity to do some spiritual spelunking. Plumb the depths of your own heart and soul in the fullness of all the hope and sorrow and joy and lament and lingering resentments and past hurts and things you're still trying to figure out what you feel about, right? Be unafraid to enter the dark recesses and caverns of your heart that you have for so long ignored for fear of facing old failures and past hurts. And as you do so, keep your eyes open for the wonder of what God's love, slowly seeping into the fissures and cracks of your soul, has been up to, even when you weren't able to perceive it, and what it's yet able to do, especially when you're practicing awareness of it. I want to close today with a blessing by John O'Donohue, whose book of blessings, titled To Bless the Space Between Us, has been my caving companion this Lent. I start off my morning and I end my night every night with some of his blessings. And I hope that perhaps this can be a companion to you. So much of what delights and troubles you happens on a surface you take for ground. Your mind thinks your life alone. Your eyes consider air your nearest neighbor, yet it seems that a little below your heart there houses in you an unknown self, who prefers the patterns of the dark and is not persuaded by the eye's affection or caught by the flash of thought. It is a self that enjoys contemplative patience with all your unfolding expression, is never drawn to break into light, though you entangle yourself in unworthiness and misjudge what you do and who you are. It presides within you like an evening freedom that will often see you enchanted by twilight without ever recognizing the falling night. It resembles the under earth of your visible life. All you do and say and think is fostered deep in its opaque and prevenient clay. It dwells in a strange yet rhythmic ease that is not ruffled by disappointment. It presides in a deeper current of time, free from the force of cause and sequence that otherwise shapes your life. Were it to break forth in today, its dark light might quench your mind, for it knows how your primeval heart sisters every cell of your life to all your known mind would avoid. Thus it knows to dwell in you gently, offering you only discreet glimpses of how you construct your life. At times, it will lead you strangely, magnetized by some resonance that ambushes your vigilance. It works most resolutely at night, as the poet who draws your dreams, creating for you many secret doors decorated with pictures of your hunger. It has the dignity of the angelic that knows you to your roots, always awaiting your deeper befriending to take you beyond the threshold of want, where all your diverse strainings can come to wholesome ease. Beloved, may you in this week and in the weeks ahead find some wholesome ease. And in the interim time, I hope that you'll continue to find ways to connect with some spiritual spelunking partners at Foundry. There's a prayer retreat coming up on Tuesday, the 16th at 6:30 p.m. with Pastor Kelly. That's going to be a tremendous gift, and I hope that you'll receive that offering. We have a women's retreat happening on April 16th. Registration, 16th, 17th, and 18th. Registration has just now opened. We're going to drop the link into the comments so that you can celebrate and be a part of that if you would like to. And of course, we want to encourage you to continue joining us weekly as each of our pastors leads us through devotions and reflections right here on Facebook Live. You can join Pastor Ginger tomorrow for Ponderings from the Purple Parlor. And I know that that will be a profound gift. Until next time, friends, be unafraid of facing your fissures and fault lines. And remember as you do so, as you dive deep into the caverns of your heart, to be gentle with yourselves and gentle with others. Because God loves you, absolutely. We love you too. And as always, have many, many, many blessings on the journey. Bye for now.